episode of Codo Cinema, the podcast show where I talk about movies. I'm your host, Mark Codo, aka Codoman. Well, folks, we are back once more and we are going to talk about another Disney movie. And to follow up from my previous episode, which is me talking about Walt Disney's Fantasia, which came out in 1940, I thought it would be a good idea for me to follow up my previous episode with me talking about the sequel that came out. I'm going to talk about its sequel, Walt Disney's Fantasia 2000. Now, Walt Disney's Fantasia 2000 is a 1999 American animated musical anthology film produced by Walt Disney Feature Animation. This movie is produced by Roy E. Disney and Donald W. Ernest in its sequel to Disney's 1940 animated feature film Fantasia. Like its predecessor, Fantasia 2000 consists of animated segments set to pieces of classical music, with segments being introduced by celebrities including Steve Martin, Itzhak Perlman, Quincy Jones, Bette Midler, James Earl Jones, Penn and Teller, James Levine, and Angela Lansbury in live-action scenes directed by Don Hahn. And it's directed by, and with Don Hahn being one of the directors, it is also directed by Pixot Hunt, Hendel Butoy, Eric Goldberg, James Alger, Francis Lebus, Paul and Gatan Brzee, with cinematography done by Tim Surdstedt, while being distributed by Buena Vista Pictures Distribution, with Walt Disney Pictures and Walt Disney Feature Animation being the production companies for this movie. Now, of course, this was released in 1999 on December 17th, 1999 at the Carnegie Hall, while it was released in the United States on June 16th of 2000, while being released in IMAX on January 1st of 2000. So technically it was released in 1999, but later releases for this movie was in 2000. To put it right there, this movie is technically celebrating its 25th anniversary since it was released in the United States on June 16th of 2000, but unfortunately its first release date was at the Carnegie Hall in December of 1999. So technically this movie is 26 years old if you count the December 17th, 1999 release date. But of course, it was distributed on January 1st, 2000 in IMAX and June 16th, 2000 in US. So on those date standards, it's technically 25, 26 years old. Like, I'm not kidding. This movie is basically over 20 years old. It's basically 25, 26 years old. And it's basically an amazing film. I mean, sure, it may not be a great sequel, but I find this movie to be amazing to watch, to be quite honest. Kind of like what the original Fantasia had. So anyway, just to move forward, I will be giving my background on this movie, plus the production history, while also breaking down the musical segments and giving in my overall thoughts, while also talking about the history of those segments. To continue with this, after numerous unsuccessful attempts to develop a Fantasia sequel, the Walt Disney Company revived the idea shortly after Michael Eisner became Chief Executive Officer in 1984, with development paused until the commercial success of the 1991 home video release of Fantasia, which convinced Eisner that there was enough public interest and funds for a sequel, to which he assigned Disney as executive producer. The music for 6 of the film's 8 segments is performed by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, conducted by James Levine. The film includes The Sorcerer's Apprentice from the 1940 original, with each new segment produced by combining traditional animation with computer-generated imagery. Fantasia 2000 is a part of the Disney Renaissance and also commemorates Walt Disney's third animated feature film, which is honoring the original Fantasia movie. Now, Fantasia 2000, as I mentioned, was released on December 17th, 1999 at the Carnegie Hall in New York City as part of a concert tour that also visited London, Paris, Tokyo, and of course, Pasadena, California. The film was then released in 75 IMAX theaters worldwide from January 1st to April 30th of 2000, making it the first major Hollywood motion picture to be released in IMAX and also the first feature-length animated film to be released in that format. Its general release in regular theaters followed on June 16th of 2000. The film received mostly positive reviews from critics who praised several of its sequences while also deeming its overall quality uneven in comparison to its predecessor. However, the film was a box office flop and it was budgeted at 80 to 85 million, only grossed 90.9 million worldwide. So it's sad that this movie didn't make enough money at the box office. I mean, yeah, it did broke the budget, but unfortunately, what it grossed worldwide, which was 90.9 million, it wasn't enough to be considered, like a hit, right? I mean, sure, yeah, it made its money back. It wasn't enough to, like, break even, right? But anyway, just to segue into my background. So, just to give you my background, Fantasia 2000 was the film that pulled me in because to be quite honest, like Fantasia 2000, I mean, it's a Disney movie, but also its predecessor, like this is not your typical fairy tale. This is a completely different movie. Like you're basically letting the music and the visuals tell the story, right? Much like the first film, and that's what the first film did. But what's different with this movie is the fact that, yeah, it's basically the same. It's basically similar to the first film, but it was a little different. Now, for reasons. One reason is because now you have celebrities doing the introductions to each song that is being presented in this movie. Plus, the new conductor. I mean, the original conductor and the band was Leopold Stokowski and the Philadelphia Orchestra. This sequel has James Levine conducting the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, to which I really appreciate how this movie really brought in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Like I never realized that until I saw this again on DVD when I was in middle school. Like it's amazing how Walt Disney's Fantasia got the Chicago Symphony Orchestra to be in this movie. Another reason this movie is a little different is because this movie is combining hand-drawn animation, which is the traditional animation, with computer-generated imagery, right? So it's combining both CGI and actual hand-drawn animation into one for some of the segments, which I find that to be amazing too. Now, Fantasia 2000, I grew up with this movie on home video. I watched it on home video, and also to mention this, I didn't even know this movie was a sequel to the original that came out in 1940. And to anybody who was listening to my previous episode, I mentioned that I got the double feature DVD for Christmas back in 2011 when I was in Colorado for Christmas. And that's where I came to realize, like, oh, this movie is basically a sequel to the 1940 original. So that's amazing right there. And I really enjoyed this movie so much. Like, at the time, like, I didn't know what to expect from this movie. I was just basically in it for the music and the visuals, and not so much for the celebrities. But you know what? As I got older, I appreciate the movie as a whole. And I recognize some of the celebrities, too. Like, most notably, Steve Martin and James Earl Jones. I didn't know who the other celebrities were until I got older. One thing to mention is that the Sorcerer's Apprentice is in this movie too. Like this was my introduction to the Sorcerer's Apprentice, where Mickey Mouse was basically the sorcerer trying to have the broomstick do his chores for him. Like that was my introduction to the Sorcerer's Apprentice. To be quite honest, believe it or not. Anyway, we're gonna move forward. We're gonna talk about the film, the production of this movie. So apparently, in 1940, Walt Disney released Fantasia, his third animated feature film. His second was Walt Disney's Pinocchio, which also came out the same year as Fantasia. And of course, Fantasia consisted of 8 animated segments set to pieces of classical music. He initially planned to have the film on continual release with new segments replacing older ones so audiences would never see the same film twice. That idea was dropped following the film's initial box office bo- bo- following the film's initial low box office receipts and a mixed response from critics. Following preliminary work on new segments, the idea was shelved by 1942 and was not revisited for the remainder of Disney's life. So this was put to rest. So basically, the sequel was put to rest in 1942. So they were originally going to move forward with a sequel, but unfortunately, due to the low box office receipts and mixed response from critics, it was shelved in 1942. And that's probably a good. And there is a good reason behind it because, to be fair though, World War II got in the way of this movie and pretty much several other Disney animated movies that came out in the 1940s because World War II was a huge impact for many Hollywood productions, including some of the Walt Disney animated feature films. Fantasia is one of them, and apparently the European markets were cut off due to World War II, which explains why the film's box office was low, and of course shelving the movie as well in 1942. So that's the reason. That's basically the reason why that sequel never came to light. But of course, Walt Disney said this quote: Fantasia is timeless. It may run 10, 20, or 30 years. It may run after I'm gone. Fantasia is an idea in itself. I can never build another Fantasia. I can improve. I can elaborate. That's all. End of quote from Walt Disney. End of quote from Walt Disney himself. And you know what? He was right about one thing. This movie, the original movie, literally ran for a long time. Like it's been, let's be honest, it's been 85 years since the first Fantasia movie came out, and it's obviously a timeless classic. I think he was ahead of his time for what he just said, right? It may run 10, 20, or 30 years. It may run after I'm gone. Like, Fantasia is still running. Like, people are still watching, like, these. People are still watching the old. People are still watching these classics. Like, they're timeless classic. They're timeless classics. I mean, these movies, these early Walt Disney animated feature films are timeless classics, including Fantasia, and that's been going on for many years. And of course, with the sequel coming into the fold, that's amazing right there. To which, about 40 years later, Wolfgang Reitherman and Mel Shaw started preliminary work on a Musicana feature film mixing jazz, classical music, myths, modern art, following the old Fantasia format that was to present ethnic tales from around the world with the music of the various countries. And of course, the idea started in 1980 by Wolfgang Reitherman and Mel Shaw. However, that project was canceled in favor of Mickey's Christmas Carol, which came out in 1983. However, the idea of a Fantasia sequel was revived shortly after Michael Eisner became chief executive officer of the Walt Disney Company in 1984, when Walt's nephew, Vice Chairman Roy E. Disney, suggested to him at lunch. The idea had first entered Disney's mind 10 years later, and he recalled Eisner's reaction, and I quote, "It was as if a big light bulb went on over his head. The idea was enticing, but we didn't have the resources to carry it out." However, Walt Disney Studios chairman Jeffrey Katzenberg showed a lack of interest in the film. He had once asked Andre Previn to work on a Fantasia film, but Previn declined after he learned it was to feature songs by the Beatles rather than classical music. Eisner approached Leonard Bernstein with the same idea, but while he seemed enthusiastic, Bernstein died before production began. It took a further 7 years before the film was reconsidered after the 1990 reissue of Fantasia grossed $25 million domestically, and the announcement of its limited availability on home video in 1991 prompted 9.2 million pre-orders. Disney saw its commercial success as a sign that there was enough public interest in the Fantasia franchise to make a sequel. Eisner finally gave the green light to the film in 1991 and had Disney serve as an executive producer on the basis that its production was funded by the proceeds from the video sales. Disney assigned Donald W. Ernest as producer and Hendo Butoy as supervisory director, having liked his work on The Rescuers Down Under. During the search for a suitable conductor, Disney and Walt Disney Feature Animation president Thomas Schumacher invited Metropolitan Opera conductor James Levine and manager Peter Gelb to a meeting in September of 1991. Disney recalled, and I quote, "I asked James what his thought was on a 3-minute version of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. He paused and went, I think the right 3 minutes would be beautiful." End of quote. And in November of 1992, Disney, Schumacher, Levine, Gelb, and Butoy met in Vienna to discuss a collection of story reels developed, one of them being The Pines of Rhone, which Levine took an immediate liking to. Butoy described Levine's enthusiasm toward the film as, and I quote, "like a kid in a candy store." Because Katzenberg continued to express some hostility towards the film, Disney held development meetings without him and reportedly directed to Eisner instead something that author James B. Stewart wrote, and I quote, would have been unthinkable on any other future animation project. Production began under the working title of Fantasia Continued with a release in 1997. The title was changed to Fantasia 1999 followed by Fantasia 2000 to coincide with its theatrical release in 2000. Disney formed its initial running order with half of the Fantasia program and only 3 or 4 new members with the aim of releasing a semi-new movie. Realizing the idea would not work, he kept 3 Fantasia segments, and the 3 of them were The Sorcerer's Apprentice, The Nutcracker Suite, and Dance of the Hours in the program for quite a while. Night on Bald Mountain was the most difficult segment for him to remove from his original running order because it was one of his favorites. He had placed it in the middle of the film without Ave Maria, but felt it did not work and scrapped the idea. Later on, Dance of the Hours was dropped. The Nutcracker Suite was replaced by Rhapsody in Blue during the last few months of production following the response from numerous test screenings. Disney kept The Sorcerer's Apprentice in the final program as an homage to Fantasia. The segment underwent digital restoration by Cinesight in Los Angeles. And I think that was a smart move that they kept The Sorcerer's Apprentice in this film because, let's be honest, Fantasia would not exist without The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Like, The Sorcerer's Apprentice is arguably the best segment to come out of Fantasia. I would go so far to say that The Sorcerer's Apprentice is obviously the best part in Fantasia 2000 as well. I mean, sure, yeah, there are many classical compositions in Fantasia 2000, but you can't beat The Sorcerer's Apprentice because, let's be honest, The Sorcerer's Apprentice is the reason why Fantasia existed in the first place. There was even a classic composition that was originally going to be in the first Fantasia movie and was going to be in the sequel, and that would be Clair de Lune, a piece originally made for Fantasia that followed 2 great white herons flying through the Everglades at night, but thought it was pretty boring. Not my words, that came from Disney himself. And of course, there was an idea to have a nightmare and a dream struggling for a sleeping child's soul to Rhapsody on a Theme by Paganini by Sergei Rachmaninoff, which was fully storyboarded but fell through. And that's basically it for the production as a whole. And yes, Clair de Lune was basically dropped from not just the first movie, but also the second movie as well. In fact, there were other classic compositions, and Bette Midler, and of course, Bette Midler, who introduced one of the classical songs in this movie, which I'll name it off later in this episode. She mentioned some of the other classical compositions as well, like "Ride of the Valkyries" by Richard Wagner, and then of course "The Swan of Tuonela" by John Sibelius, and of course "Invitation to the Dance" by Carl Maria von Weber, and of course there was the polka and fugue from Schwanda the Bagpiper by Jaromir Weinberger, and of course there was going to be a baby ballet set to Berceuse by Frederick Chopin, and of course a bug ballet set to Flight of the Bumblebee by Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. And funny enough, the bug ballet that featured Flight of the Bumblebee was later adapted into the Bumble Boogie segment in Melody Time, which came out in 1948. So there, and of course, so basically there you have it right. So basically there you have it right there. Those are some of the segments. Those are some of the classical compositions that were originally going to be in Fantasia 2000. That was actually introduced by Bette Midler right there. She also mentioned Destino, which is a collaboration between Walt Disney and surrealist artist Salvador Dali, which was also considered for inclusion as a future Fantasia segment but was shelved until it was rediscovered during production of Fantasia 2000. And yes, I already discussed Claire de Lune, which was actually Debussy's composition. Which was actually, yeah, Debussy's composition. Claude Debussy's composition, yeah. And it's sad that this segment was cut from both movies, although it would have made it would have been a nice idea. Although it is sad that Claude Debussy's Claire de Lune was cut from both movies. I mean, I guess they were playing around with the idea, but I think it didn't work. You know, in fact, one of the reasons it was cut out of the final film to shorten its lengthy runtime. You know, I think that's probably one of the reasons, because come to think of it, the original Fantasia was 2 hours and 6 minutes. That's basically 126 minutes. And the sequel that followed had a runtime of 74 minutes, which is basically 1 hour and 14 minutes. So it would be it would have been interesting if they actually put that segment into the sequel, you know, to extend the runtime a little bit, but we don't know how long that segment was going to be, so who knows? So who knows about it? I mean, we don't really know much about it. We just know it was cut out due to time. But thankfully, the sequence itself, Claire de Lune, was later edited and rescored for the Blue Bayou segment in Make Mine Music in 1946. And of course, the work print of the original was discovered in 1992 and was restored, completed with the original soundtrack of Stokowski with the Philadelphia Orchestra, and it was included as a bonus feature in the Fantasia anthology DVD in 2000. So at the very least, it was able to find light somewhere. But yeah, that's basically about it for that part. So anyway, how about we get to the breakdown of this movie, shall we? So the movie opens up with the sound of an orchestra tuning and, of course, archive footage of the original Fantasia, including Deems Taylor's introduction from Fantasia as well. Panels showing various segments from the first movie fly in outer space and form the set and stage for an orchestra. Musicians take their seats and tune up as animators and artists draw at their desks before James Levine approaches the conductor's podium and signals the beginning of the piece. And of course, also to add this, if you have the home video version of Fantasia 2000, because I first saw Walt Disney's Fantasia 2000 on home video, and it features a home video introduction of Roy E. Disney telling the audience about about the past Disney movies, the animation that they use, the sound, the colorization, plus the technology they have used in their later movies as well, including the last film that they mentioned on home video, which was 2000's Dinosaur, which also that movie is also celebrating its 25th anniversary as well. And that home video introduction led into and that home introduction and that home video introduction segues into Walt Disney's Fantasia 2000. In the segment, proper abstract patterns and shapes that resemble hundreds of colorful triangle-shaped butterflies in dozens of magenta, reds, oranges, yellows, greens, turquoises, blues, indigo, violets, purples, pinks, grays, whites, and browns in various shades, tints, tones, and hues explore the world of light and darkness. Willa is being pursued by a swarm of dark black pentagon or hexagon shaped bats. And of course, the world is ultimately conquered by light and color. And this, of course, and this is basically Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which is basically, and this is basically and I am referring to Beethoven's Fifth Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which is Symphony Number 5 by Ludwig von Beethoven. And of course, like Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is about triumph itself, and of course, this whole segment is about triumph. This whole segment is about triumph itself, about every hard-won victory that has ever been or ever will be. It's a story of despair, Beethoven's deafness, and establishing the will to go on. The most prominent mood as he presented at the symphony's end is one of hope, optimism, and triumph. The mood contrasts with symphony's beginning, which communicates a darker, almost angry mood for Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Now, of course, we move on to the next segment, which introduces our first, celebrity, which is basically Steve Martin, introducing the audience to, well, obviously Fantasia, but also talking about some of the other segments that were originally going to be in this movie, but also, but some of them didn't make it in. Of course, one did, which is Walt Disney's. Of course, one did, which is The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which actually, funny enough, actually makes a early appearance for a split second when Steve Martin was on screen, and of course, Steve Martin introduces to another celebrity, which is Itzhak, which is Itzhak Perlman, who is a violin player who introduces the next segment. So, and also to add this, Steve claims that many of the musicians are playing on the program for the very first time after taking a 2-week instruments course with him at his academy. Huh. Very funny right there. I mean, well, anyway, good for Steve Martin right there. So then, Itzhak Perlman introducing the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and James Levine to Pines of Rome by Ortino Respighi, and of course, this is basically a poem, right? The poem is the Italian's composer tribute to scenes around his country's capital, some contemporary and some recalling the glory of the Roman Empire. And of course, Perlman said that the Disney animation team heard the piece and they imagined it in a very different way. Even Perlman says, when you hear a title like Pines of Rome, what do you think of? Some trees, but also, Roman capital, Roman Empire stuff that takes place around the country's capital. But he mentions that, the Disney animation team heard it a different way, but this time with a family of humpback whales flying, right? And I think that was a brilliant way to open up the second segment because, in my opinion, Pines of Rome is one of my favorite compositions in this movie. not the favorite composition, but one of my favorites because of the music. Like, the music in this, it feels very, very triumphant and epic at the same time. Plus, the introduction of the humpback whales, it opens in the Arctic Ocean because if you really pay attention, they're basically in the Arctic Ocean, and they're basically, having a good time flying around up until when this baby whale, or calf, I should say, is separated from his parents when it goes playing with a pack of seagulls and trapped in an iceberg. The calf is not able to find its way out, and the iceberg has ice spikes everywhere. Eventually, he finds his way out with his mother's help, and the family join a larger pod of whales who fly and frolic through the clouds to emerge into outer space. And that's basically it for the Pines of Rome right there. Now, to move forward, we have another composition, which is Rhapsody in Blue by George Gershwin, and this is being introduced by Quincy Jones with pianist Ralph Grierson. And Quincy Jones talks about the artwork that is being used in that segment. And the artwork is very good. I really appreciate the artwork. It looks like hand-drawn artwork that is being sketched out. That's what I really liked about that segment. Like, this segment is set in New York City in the 1930s, so basically during the time of the Great Depression, and is designed in the style of Al Hirschfeld's known caricatures of the time. The story follows four individuals who wish for a better life. And these four individuals, their names are Duke, Joe, Rachel, and John. So Duke is a construction worker who dreams of becoming a jazz drummer. Joe is a down on his luck, unemployed man who wishes he could get a job. Rachel is a little girl who wants to spend time with her parents instead of being shuttled around by her governess. And John is a hurried, rich husband who longs for a simpler, more fun life. The segment ends with all four getting their wish. Through their stories, interact with each other's without any of them knowing. And of course, we get the next segment, and this segment is basically The Steadfast Tin Soldier by Hans Christian Andersen. And this is being introduced by Bette Midler, who, as I mentioned, she talks about some of the other classical compositions that were cut from both movies. So this leads up to her introducing The Steadfast Tin Soldier by Hans Christian Andersen, but the composition that they use is called Piano Concerto No. 2, Allegro Opus 102 by Dmitri Shostakovich. And of course, this segues into the segment. A broken toy soldier with one leg falls in love with a toy ballerina and protects her from an evil jack-in-the-box. Unlike the original story, this version has a happy ending. Introduced by Bette Midler, featuring pianist Yevhen Bronfman. And the way how it's played out, it is a playful and cheerful piece composed as a 19th birthday gift for his son Maxim, who also premiered it. It is known for its youthful vitality, wit, and lyrical beauty, contrasting with some of Shostakovich's more somber works. Now, the next number is basically the Carnival of the Animals finale, or should I say, Le Carnaval des Animaux, by Camille Saint-Saëns, which is basically a flock of flamingos who, try to force a slapstick member who enjoys playing a yo-yo to engage in the flock's dull routines. This is introduced by James Earl Jones with animator Eric Goldberg. And I find it funny that James Earl Jones reads off this note that Eric Goldberg gave him, and James reads it and says, "What would happen if you gave a yo-yo to a flock of flamingos?" Right? That's the ultimate question. Like, that's the ultimate question right there. Like, what will happen if you give a yo-yo to a flock of flamingos? Well, I think this segment says it all, right? It gives you the answer. So the next number, this leads into the next number, which is basically, what else? The Sorcerer's Apprentice. Now, this one is a reprise, and I've already mentioned the background for The Sorcerer's Apprentice, but You could definitely listen to that during my previous episode, which is basically me talking about the original Fantasia. But I'll give the short version of this pretty soon. But but yeah, I mentioned that in my previous episode. But hey, we gotta continue with that, right? So anyway, the Sorcerer's Apprentice, which is basically composed by Paul Dukas, based on the 1797 poem of the same name by Goethe. The segment is the only one featured in both Fantasia and Fantasia 2000. And of course, this is introduced by Penn and Teller instead of using archived recordings of Deems Taylor introducing the segment in the original film. So it tells the story of Mickey Mouse, an apprentice of sorcerer Yensid, to which Yensid is basically Disney in reverse, who attempts some of his master's magic tricks before knowing how to control them. Now, of course, the scene continues, with Mickey Mouse going up the stairs with two buckets of water. He's basically tired from working, um, and he sees Yensid doing his magic tricks, leading to where he creates like a smoke-filled butterfly, and Mickey sees it all until Yensid brings it all down and takes his hat off to, I guess, take a nap. Because if you pay attention, Yensid was yawning after doing his magic tricks, so he decided to go upstairs for a nap. I think that's what he was doing, but if you see him yawning, it kind of indicates that he's going to take a nap. He takes his hat off and leaves it on his desk. So, and Mickey watches Yensid go up the stairs, and he sees the hat, and gets the idea. I was like, my master's going to bed. Now it's my turn to try it. So Mickey grabs the hat and puts it on. He poses for a second and sees and looks at a magic broom, giving him the idea like that he's going to use magic on the broom to do his chores, right? And Mickey Mouse does so, and I'm going to be completely honest. The Mickey Mouse in his sorcerer outfit, in my opinion, the best Mickey Mouse costume, in my opinion. Hands down, best Mickey Mouse costume is his Sorcerer's Apprentice outfit. I love his outfit. His outfit is amazing. The red cloak, the sorcerer's hat, like, I love it. It's so awesome. That's literally his best outfit. I love it. So anyway, Mickey Mouse, uses the magic to bring the broomstick to life, and I really like how the music goes into like a thriller style, thriller style moment where it goes like da da da, like as he was trying to like bring the broomstick to life, and he accomplishes it and gives the broomstick arms. And then of course this leads into the actual march, which is the dum dum bum 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 the march for the sorcerer's apprentice, and the broomstick follows Mickey because Mickey is giving him orders to do his water bucket chores. Goes to this well and goes to this water fountain to fill up the buckets of water and put it inside this. I think it's a well. I believe. I could be wrong. I mean, I think it's a well or some sort. I mean, I could be wrong, but anyway, I mean, Mickey lets the broom continue to do the work while Mickey is just dancing along and sitting on the master's chair and taking a nap. Like he falls asleep while the broom is still doing the work, right? So Mickey falls asleep and dreams of becoming, the world's most powerful sorcerer in the world. Like he is basically, he's moving his hands and fingers around, touching the stars and making the waves from the ocean come up. And I really liked how the symbols come into play when the waves are coming up towards Mickey. Same with the thunder and lightning as well. Like he's pointing at it while the symbols are clapping in the background, up until he wakes up from his dream, where the entire room is flooded, and Mickey tries to stop the broom, but unfortunately, like, he doesn't know the magic. I don't think he knows the magic on how to stop a broom from doing his chores, right? And Mickey even gets tossed in that well when that broom was pouring water up until the point where the broom is running. I find it funny how that broom is running away from Mickey as he's still doing his chores. And I just find it funny because the broom is like, "Try to catch me, sucker!" It's just so funny the way how he runs. It's just like him saying, "Try to catch me, sucker." But Mickey had enough with this broomstick, so he grabs an axe and chops the broom into itty bitty pieces. And this is basically Mickey Mouse going from a innocent mouse to a homicidal rat, chopping the broom into pieces, right? Probably the most brutal thing that Mickey Mouse has ever done, right? Like it's it's violent. Like Mickey Mouse is just basically a rodent at this point. Mickey Mouse became a psychotic rodent at that point while chopping the broom into pieces. But unfortunately, what he doesn't realize that it's not done. What he doesn't realize is that the broom came back to life, but this time with his other variants. Like a Hydra in Greek mythology, cut off one head, two more shall take his place. Whether the broomstick, if you chop it to itty bitty pieces, more broomsticks will come back. And Mickey Mouse learned that the hard way. And I find it funny how the march continues, but it's continuing again because Mickey Mouse like hears the noise from behind. He opens the door, sees multiple brooms coming out with multiple buckets of water, and they ran over him. Go downstairs to that well to fill the well. Go downstairs to fill that well up with water. More water, and the room starts to flood even more, up until the point where Mickey Mouse tries to empty the room, but fails at it. Gets dragged underwater to the point where he goes on the sorcerer's book for safety, and the march continues. The march continues with all the brooms going downstairs underwater to fill up that well or that cauldron or whatever it's called. Mickey Mouse tries desperately to find a spell to stop the brooms, but he fails at it miserably because he almost drowns in a whirlpool while all the brooms are underwater, to which I don't know why they're underwater, but hey, it's magic, whatever. And I'll be honest, I'm pretty sure those broomsticks are getting paid for this. While all that's going on, the sorcerer wakes up from his nap and sees the entire room flooded with water, and the sorcerer stops the water with his magic, right? He pulls out both his hands to create to split the wave apart. He's trying to split it apart to stop the flood, right? And he does it in good fashion. Up until the point where he sees Mickey Mouse defeated, and the sorcerer Jensen was like, "Mickey, what did you do?" And Mickey was like, "Here's your hat back. Well, here's the broom. I better get to work." Oh my goodness, Mickey. But he's just trying to make things better, but it doesn't. I especially like how Mickey Mouse gives Jensen the look. He's like, as he was about to go outside with the buckets to fill up more water, and then the sorcerer hits him with a broomstick and then ends like that. That's it for that part. But I also like how it segues into Mickey giving his congratulations to asking Leopold Stokowski his congratulations, right, and shaking his hand. Although this time around, it's not Walt Disney voicing Mickey, it's Wayne Allwine voicing Mickey Mouse. And then after that handshake with Leopold Stokowski, Mickey goes to see James Levine, who introduces Pomp and Circumstance, Marches 1, 2, 3, and 4, by Sir Edward Elgar. And of course, this is a funny bit because as James Levine introduced the segment, Mickey is going around backstage just to find Donald Duck, and Donald Duck is being played by Tony Anselmo, while Russie Taylor played Daisy Duck, but only for a screaming portion of it because Mickey Mouse accidentally went into one of the dressing rooms, and one of the dressing rooms had Daisy Duck, and this was by accident. It was an accident. It was just an accident because Mickey was looking for Donald Duck until Mickey found Donald Duck taking a shower, and Mickey was like, "Donald, you're on in 2 seconds. You better get on stage right now." Donald's like, "What? You gotta be kidding me!" And of course also the ad. While James Levine, also to add to James Levine talked about Pop and Circumstance, which is basically, to anybody who knows about Pop and Circumstance, which is the da 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 da. That's basically like the march for your graduation, right? Graduation ceremony, and he mentions that too, but he came to realize that the Disney animation team decided to, use that song for a new story, like Noah's Ark from the Book of Genesis, which is basically, to anybody's knowledge, Book of Genesis, to anybody who's in religion, Book of Genesis is the first book of the Bible, primarily about the beginning of everything, creation and the fall of humanity, and the establishment of God's relationship with humanity, particularly through the patriarchs like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, while also including the accounts of the Great Flood and the story of the patriarch Joseph and his older brothers. And of course, this is mentioned by James Levine, as I mentioned. And once Donald Duck was ready, James Levine said, "Ladies and gentlemen, Pomp and Circumstance, starring Donald Duck." So this is basically Donald Duck being, Noah, right? Instead of like Noah bringing the animals onto the ark, it is Donald Duck this time, along with Daisy Duck, although it's Donald Duck doing the work. So Donald is given the task of gathering the animals to the ark, and misses, loses, and reunites with Daisy Duck in the process, to which, as I mentioned, introduced by James Levine. And the last number is the Firebird Suite by Igor Stravinsky, and this is the 1919 version of the Firebird, and this is being introduced by Angela Lansbury. And this segment is about a sprite who is awoken by her companion, an elk, and accidentally wakes up a fiery spirit of destruction in a nearby volcano who destroys the forest and seemingly the sprite. But the sprite survives, and the elk encourages her to restore the forest to its normal state. And that is the end of not only that segment, but the movie Fantasia 2000 as a whole. Now, I want to give him my overall thoughts on this movie. I still enjoy this movie. Now, do I think this movie is better than the first one? Not really, no. Because the original Fantasia on its own holds up to this day, and so does this movie as well. But to be fair though, this movie has some great musical compositions. Like, these are brand new musical compositions. Some of them by now, of course, Ludwig van Beethoven and Igor Stravinsky are the only two from the first Fantasia movie to have different scores for this movie, right? And the same can be said with Paul Dukas and the Sorcerer's Apprentice, right? So those two, including Paul Dukas for Sorcerer's Apprentice, they're like the only composers who were involved. Well, obviously their songs were involved. Obviously their musical compositions were involved in this movie, right? But of course, obviously enough, the new ones are pretty good too. I mean, I really enjoyed the Pines of Rome a lot in this movie. Although I still consider the Sorcerer's Apprentice to be the best classic composition to be featured in Fantasia 2000. I mean, come on. When you think of Fantasia, when you think of the movie Fantasia, you think of the Sorcerer's Apprentice. Just saying. But with some of these compositions, I really enjoyed Pines of Rome To me, it's a tie between the Firebird and the Pines of Rome because both of these compositions have epic finales, to be quite honest. But one thing I want to point out is Symphony Number Five. Now, Symphony Number Five is obviously a good favorite as well. I think Symphony Number Five, the Pines of Rome, and the Firebird Suite are like three of the best classic compositions to be put into this movie. And the Sorcerer's Apprentice, come on, the Sorcerer's Apprentice still tops all the compositions, but taking Sorcerer's Apprentice out of the equation, you got these compositions like Pines of Rome, Symphony Number Five, and the Firebird as someone like as three of the best compositions in my opinion, as three of the best classical compositions put into this movie, in my personal opinion. Those three classic compositions I liked. I mean, come on, I can't deny Sorcerer's Apprentice. The other ones I really enjoy, I enjoy Rhapsody in Blue by George Gershwin, the Piano Concerto by Shostakovich with the Steadfast Tin Soldier, which was pretty good. And then, of course, you got the Carnival of the Animals, which I'm pretty sure, in my opinion, is probably the goofiest composition to put on a screen because obviously because of the flamingos and the yo-yo. And then, of course, you got Pomp and Circumstance, which is a fun composition. Doing the whole Noah's Ark storyline for that. I enjoyed these songs for this movie. Now, of course, this is a bit of a nitpick, but I think Pines of Rome would have fit more for the finale than the Firebird Suite. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the Firebird Suite at the end of Fantasia. I thought the composition itself was really good, but I feel like Pines of Rome had a more epic conclusion, right? Because if you really think about it, it's like the way how it ended. Is where all the whales were going up into space. They're basically in this brand new ocean up in space. Celebrating because obviously they made it up there. If you know what I'm saying. And then of course the mama whale, papa whale, and of course the calf were doing their final splash, right? And when it had the entire orchestra bring in a triumphant end to the score, right? Like, to me, that would have fit more for the finale, but at the same time, I still appreciate the Firebird Suite for the end because let's be honest, that finale ending of that sprite, coming back to fix up that entire forest, that was epic right there. That's just a little nitpick on my part. Now, this next part is going to be a bit on the negative side. The only negative thing that I have to say about this movie, and I understand that this is going to be a bit controversial, but bear with me. All these celebrities introduced the different composition segments in this movie, and while I do appreciate that, and it is nice to see the celebrities on screen. In my personal opinion, they should have stuck out with maybe at least one celebrity rather than just have multiple celebrities introduce the segments at once. Now, part of me does kind of understand why some of them are on screen introducing these segments because some of these celebrities are also musicians too, like Bette Midler, Steve Martin. They're both singers, and they have actually sang a few songs. They actually have sang before in other projects, right? So I can see why those two were on board, but at the same time, you got Quincy Jones, who is a legend in the music industry, right? And then of course, yes, Angela Lansbury, who's also a great actress, but she also sings too, most notably with the Beauty and the Beast theme song, right? But you also got guys like Penn and Teller, which, in my opinion, they're probably the funniest duo in that segment, in my personal opinion. They're basically magicians, and I mean, it kind of makes sense because they're the ones introducing the Sorcerer's Apprentice. I mean, it's a bit funny, but I'm like, really? While it's funny, but at the same time, you had Deems Taylor from the original Fantasia film who introduced all the Fantasia compositions that were played in the original movie. So it's just one person, right? And to me, it kind of makes and to me it kind of and to me it makes sense to have one person. But and look, I don't mind having at least more. I don't mind having more than one celebrity introducing the segments, but I feel like there should have been it should have stopped with there should have been four celebrities in my personal opinion. I believe Quincy Jones is a good one, and then you also have who I mean you had James Earl Jones as well. James Earl Jones did the introduction to the Carnival of the Animals, who read off this mystery of what will happen if you give a yo-yo to a flock of to a what will happen if you give a yo-yo to a flock of flamingos. And I think that was the funniest bit from him in that segment. But I think James Earl Jones, Quincy Jones, and then James Levine. James Levine is a maestro, is one of the main maestros for he's a big maestro in music. Like he's a big name in the music industry. And then who else? And then you got Itzhak Perlman, who's a violin player, who also introduced the Pines of Rome. So, if anything, I got a feeling they should have stuck with Quincy Jones, James Earl Jones, and then of course James Levine and Itzhak Perlman. And I think that's a good number to have like these four celebrities introduce. You know the rest of the introduce the rest of the compositions. I mean, the celebrities did a good job, but I feel like it kind of did distract a little bit of the movie itself. But in my opinion, James Earl Jones, Quincy Jones, and then of course Itzhak Perlman and James Levine, and of course Angela Lansbury were the top heavy hitters to bring in the segments. I mean, if anything, four or five celebrities would have been fine. But anyway, that's enough about that. That's my only negative about this movie. But anyway, the music, the visuals, the CGI though, the CGI, I like. This is probably some of the best CGI animation that I have ever seen in any Walt Disney animated feature film, in my personal opinion. Like combining CGI and traditional animation, probably in my opinion, the best combination that I have ever seen put to screen. And I want to get this out of my system. Fantasia is one of many traditional animated feature films from Walt Disney, and that movie beats out some of the 3D animated Disney movies from the late 2010s to the 2020s. Enough said. Like, you look at Walt Disney's, like, 3D, and look, I like 3D anime. I like the Disney 3D animation movies. I really do. And I cannot not deny the combination of traditional and CGI animation from Fantasia and some of the other films that came, and some of the other traditional and CG animated movies that came out after Fantasia. Even some before, because coming to think of it, this movie came out towards the end of the Disney Renaissance, because many of the Walt Disney animated feature films for the Disney Renaissance were mostly traditional animation, but they also combined CGI for some of the sequences. This movie has that as well, right? And Fantasia 2000 is one of those movies that beats out the 3D Disney animated feature films from the late 2010s to the 2020s. Yeah, I mean, I'm all for hand drawn. I'm all for the traditional animation, even if it's combined with CGI. I mean, I'm all for traditional animation. And of course, I'm also on board with a combination of I'm also on board with traditional animation and CGI. I'm also on board with that as well. Enough said. All right, let's move forward. Let's talk about these segments too, the production of these segments. Now, Symphony Number 5 is the opening to Walt Disney's Fantasia, and this is directed by Pixot Hunt. with story developed by Kevin Yasuda. And in December of 1997, after rejected after different rejections for this number from four other animators, Disney and Ernest asked Hunt for his ideas. So after many ideas were rejected in December of 1997 from four other animators, Disney and Ernest asked Hunt for his ideas. Hunt first thought the story on a morning walk in Pasadena, California, one depicting a battle of good against evil and how the conflict resolves itself. It took Hunt approximately 2 years from start to finish to complete the segment. Disney and Ernest decided to go with Hunt's idea. Hunt avoided producing on entirely abstract work because, and I quote, you can get something abstract on every computer screen with ease. Hunt divided the segments into 31 mini scenes, noting down points in which he would employ vivid color when the music was bright and fluid, and then switched to darker hues when the music felt darker and denser. To gain inspiration in how the shapes would move, Hunt and his associates visited the San Diego Zoo in San Diego, California, to a butterfly farm and observed slow motion footage of bats. The segment combines hand-drawn backgrounds using pastels, and paints that were scanned into the Computer Animation Production System, or CAPS for short, and computer-generated imagery (CGI) of abstract shapes and effects, which were layered on top. Hunt explained that scanning each drawing was, and I quote, was a one-shot deal, as the platen that pressed onto it would alter the pastels once it had been scanned. At one point during production, Hunt and Yasuda completed 68 pastel drawings in 8 days. The segment was produced using Houdini animation software. And that's pretty awesome right there. And that's an awesome way to open up the movie. And to be quite honest, yes, the Symphony Number 5 is basically, the butterflies and the bats, right? I didn't know those things were. I didn't know. I kind of realized. To be quite honest, first time watching this, I kind of recognized them as butterflies, but the other group, I was like, what are those things? Are those evil butterflies, like the dark butterflies? No, those were actually bats. And I thought that was really clever, and I thought that was a clever way to depict that, right? And it's a good way to open up the segment. It's a good way to open up Fantasia 2000. You don't hear them say, now we're going to open up this movie with Symphony Number 5 by Ludwig van Beethoven. No, they just jump right into it. Like, after the film's title, and actually before the film's title, there is a shot of the first composition, and it says Symphony Number 5 by Ludwig van Beethoven, cuts to the title of the movie, and then goes into the action right away with the dun 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 dun. Like, that's how it opens up. And you know what? It's basically, it showed it didn't tell you what musical. It didn't tell you the composition. It showed you the composition. Like, it really shows the title of the composition right before the film's title. And I believe that's a good way to open up this movie. And also, as a side note, and this is gonna go off topic, Symphony Number 5 was the classic composition that I chose for my music composer presentation back in middle school. So, just to give you this story, it was my spring semester at Kennedy Junior High. I was in 6th grade, so I was like 12 years old, and in the music class that I was in, we were doing music presentations, and one of them was basically selecting a composer, right? It was something like that, and I picked out Ludwig van Beethoven because of his compositions, because of his music compositions of the Pastoral Symphony, and of course Symphony Number 5, but also his Ninth Symphony as well. But when I did when I did the presentation, and part of the presentation is picking out which classic composition I should play. I told my music teacher at Kennedy Junior High, who was teaching the music class that I was in. I told her about Walt Disney's Fantasia and Fantasia 2000, and I told her like, hey, there's Walt Disney's Fantasia and Fantasia 2000 on DVD. Great, and I was like, it'll be a great opportunity to bring it in and show it to the class, right? And my music teacher, she liked the idea. So she got the double feature of Walt Disney's Fantasia and Fantasia 2000, and I told her what song I want. I told her what composition I want to play, and it was Symphony Number 5. And she throws on the DVD of Walt Disney's Fantasia 2000 and it's basically the opening that features Symphony Number 5 by Ludwig van Beethoven. And I was doing my presentation, I mentioned that, including the Pastoral Symphony from Walt Disney's Fantasia, and I finished it off with now I present to you Symphony Number 5 by Ludwig van Beethoven. However, this time this will be presented through the movie of Walt Disney's Fantasia 2000, and that was my whole presentation. My teacher played Symphony Number 5 through Walt Disney's Fantasia 2000, and the rest was history. It was an amazing presentation that I did, and I did very well on that. So big shout out to my music teacher from Kennedy Junior High for playing the Symphony Number 5 segment from Walt Disney's Fantasia 2000. So big shout out right there. Now we move forward to the next number, and that is the Pines of Rome segment. And of course, this is obviously introduced by not one but two celebrities. This is basically Steve Martin and Itzhak Perlman for the Pines of Rome. Although I feel like Itzhak Perlman should have introduced this segment, which he did. But I feel like Itzhak Perlman should have done like the whole background Fantasia segueing into the Pines of Rome. If you know what I'm saying, right? But anyway, just to move forward, Pines of Rome was the first piece Disney suggested for the film, as well as the first to be animated. The designs appeared in studios' dailies as early as October of 1993. Butoy served as director, with James Fuji handling the story. The opening to the piece gave Disney the idea of something flying. Butoy sketched the sequence on yellow post-it notes. The story originally involved the whales flying around from the perspective of a group of penguins, but the idea was scrapped to make the baby whale a central character. The whales were also set to return to Earth, but Butoy said it never felt quite right, leading to the decision to have them break through a cloud ceiling and enter a different world by the supernova. Butoy created a musical intensity chart for the animators to follow, which tracked the ups and downs of the music. As the music brightens, so does the color, and vice versa. He explained that because CGI was in its infancy during development, the first third of the segment was hand-drawn using pencil to get a feel of how the whales would move. When the drawings were scanned into the CAPS system, Butoy found the whales were either moving too fast or had less weight to them. The drawings were altered to make the whales slow down and more believable. The eyes of the whales were drawn by hand as the desired looks and glances were not fully achievable using CGI. Butoy recalled the challenge of having the water appear and move as naturally as possible. The team decided to write a computer code from scratch, as traditional animation would have been too time consuming and would have produced undesired results. The code handling the pod of whales was written so the whales would move away if they were to collide and not bump into, overlap, or go through each other. That same technique was used for the stampede scene in The Lion King, which came out in 1994, which was produced at the same time. Like I said, Pines of Rome is an amazing composition, and the way of how the whales are presented in this movie was amazing. I didn't know the whales were CGI. I didn't know that. as I got older. Like the CGI on the whales looks so good. I mean, sure, maybe some shots it looked a little weird, but at the end of the day, it holds up. It really does because of the way of how it's drawn, the lightning, the texture, the way how it's rendered. It looked real good. It looked really good, especially that finale when all the whales are going up into outer space, and of course that's the supernova that I'm referring to, and they're basically celebrating, having a good time, right? And even though I still think this should have been the conclusion, but I was okay with it. I was okay with this composition being the second number of the night, second number of the film, right? So I'm okay with that. Now, moving forward, we move on to the next number, which is Rhapsody in Blue. And just to go off topic once more, I actually played Rhapsody in Blue with the Eastern Symphony Orchestra when I was a student at Eastern Illinois University. And of course, at the time, I actually decided to make I and at the time I actually had a music minor before I put in a major of TV and film of television and video production before I decided to do a double major with audio recording technology for music. So to anybody who's listening, yes, I double majored in TV and film while also adding in the other concentration of audio recording technology for music. So that was like my double major right there. So there's some more background on my music journey right there, so to say. So Rhapsody in Blue is the first Fantasia segment with music from an American composer, which is George Gershwin, and the score is now of course the segment is originated in 1995 when director and animator Eric Goldberg approached Al Hirschfeld about the idea of an animated short set to Gershwin's composition in the style of Hirschfeld's illustrations. In December of 1998, Goldberg pitched Rhapsody in Blue to Thomas Schumacher and received the green light to produce it, and Hirschfeld agreed to serve as an artistic consultant and allow the animators to adapt his works. Duke, who is the construction worker in the segments, is named after jazz musician Duke Ellington. The bottom of his toothpaste tube reads Nina, an Easter egg referencing Hirschfeld's daughter Nina, whose name Hirschfeld inscribed in several of his drawings since her birth in 1945. There's another Easter egg in this segment. One of his artists, Emily Giuliano, whose name is shown as Giuliano. Rachel was designed after the Goldberg's daughter. John, or Flying John, is based on animation historian and author John Culhane and Hirschfeld's caricature of Alexander Woollcott. Goldberg took Hirschfeld's original illustration of Gershwin and animated it to make him play part of the Rhapsody on the piano, which is basically in the middle of the segment. You see an animation of you see George Gershwin playing the piano, right? And this is basically this is basically a floor above the little girl, because the little girl who's playing piano, like she struggles to play until she hears another pianist, which is basically George Gershwin on the top floor, right? I think that is a nice little nod to George Gershwin right there. So the illustration also featured Ira Gershwin alongside his brother George, but Ira is not shown in the scene nor anywhere else in the film. Featured in the crowd emerging from the hotel are depictions of Brooks Atkinson and Hirschfeld along with his wife, Dolly Haas. The sequence was so chromatically complex that the rendering process using the CAP system delayed work on Tarzan, which came out in 1999. Now, Rhapsody in Blue, I think that's a nice that's a real good musical number right there. And while I'm at it, I took a history class back in Naperville Central High School. Funny enough, and my history, and I believe it was my one of my history teachers, played this segment because it took place in the 1930s, and this was at the time of the Great Depression. You know, where jobs are scarce, and of course, food and water and everything was scarce in the 1930s, which is basically the Great Depression. This was like before World War II, right? And of course, the music is really good. And I remember hearing this song also. I remember hearing this composition play during the United Airlines commercials for all the like, for the for the Chicago team sports like the White Sox, the Cubs, Chicago Bears, the Blackhawks, any Chicago team, any Chicago sports team, right? I mean, they did a United Airlines commercials. They did a United Airlines commercial, and they actually played the ending of this composition for that commercial, right? And then I think the big takeaway from this composition is arguably the animation. The animation in this is really really good. It's basically the artwork and it's basically the artwork of Al Hirschfeld, which is actually really good. And Quincy Jones introduced this segment, and that was a good way to bring this segment to life, right? And on top of that, I really liked how all four of the characters that were shown in this segment got their happy endings. Like Duke, who is a construction worker, and he leaves his construction job for just to join the band, right? And he got his wish. Like he's a drummer, but during the day he's a construction worker, but his dream is to be a drummer for a band, right? And he got his wish at the end. I also liked how during his time at work, he actually used one of the crushers. I forgot what it's called, but it's a thing that crushes one of the buildings, and Duke opens up his lunchbox, and it gives Duke the idea to get to crack his just to crack his walnuts, right? And I thought that was a real funny way. I thought it was really funny. It was like, hey, let me open up my lunchbox and put these walnuts and let the crusher thing crush it to open it up, just to crack it open, right? I mean, I thought that was hilarious, and this is all thanks to the music that goes. That was awesome and funny at the same time. And then you also got this one other guy who's basically, I think John is his name, and he's basically looking for work, right? I mean, he's basically depressed, and he was able to find work at the end of the segment because, as I mentioned, Duke left his construction job just to become a drummer, a jazz drummer. That's what it is. Yeah. And John, and actually no, I'm not talking about John. John's the one who is the husband. It's Joe. Joe is the one who is unemployed and looking for work, and he got his and he literally out of nowhere he's basically walking by the construction sites, and when there was a I think it was a drill, right? It was a drill it was a drill or a jackhammer of some sort that landed right in front of him, and the construction boss is just basically being angry at him, but being an angry construction worker, telling the guy, you're late for the night shift. And Joe, the guy who was down on his luck, he finds work, and he's happy that he got the job. And the construction worker and the construction boss is like, get to work, and Joe just gets to work immediately, right into the elevator, right? Oh man! And then of course you also got the little girl Rachel, who is basically wants to spend time with her busy parents instead of being shuttled around by her governess. I mean, she got her wish at the end by being with her parents, but also the last guy, John, who is basically being with his rich wife. his wife is just basically dragging him to all these big expensive luxuries, and then John gets his wish at the end of being free, right? He like his like Joe does he John doesn't know, but John's wife gets carried away in the construction site, right? Oh man, like it's actually nice that these four characters got their wish at the end. And the piano solo by Ralph Grierson, amazing solo right there. Now let's move forward to the next number, which is basically the Piano Concerto Number 2 by Dmitri Shostakovich, right? And of course, this is being introduced by Bette Midler, and Piano Concerto Number 2 was directed by Butoy with art director Michael Humphreys, and it originated in the 1930s when Walt Disney wished to adapt a collection of Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales into an animated film. The artists completed a series of preliminary designs based on the stories, including ones for the Steadfast Tin Soldier from 1938 by Bianca Majoli, that were stored in the studio's animation research library and used for a 1991 Disney book that retold the story accompanied with the storyboard sketches. When Disney suggested using the Shostakovich piece, Butoy flipped through the book and found the story structure fit to the music. When Humphreys saw the sketches, he designed the segment with works by Caravaggio and Rembrandt in mind to give the segment a timeless feel while keeping the colors as romantic as possible during the scenes when the soldier and ballerina are first getting acquainted. Live action footage of a real ballerina was used as a guide for the toy ballerina's movements. Butoy found the Jack in the Box a difficult character to design and animate with his spring bass and how he moved with the box. His appearance went through numerous changes, partly due to the lack of reference material available to the team. The segment marked the first time the Disney Studio created a film's main characters entirely from CGI. Initially, Butoy asked Pixar Animation Studios to handle the computer graphics, but CGI artist Steve Goldberg convinced him to let Disney's own team produce it. I mean, I wonder how different that would be if Pixar was involved. But anyway, the backgrounds were completed by hand. Originally, the drain sequence included friendly rats who performed comical gags, but the team found it did not fit the mood of the rest of the segment. The drains became a more scary environment, something that Butoy was, and I quote, what the music was telling us to do. End quote. Rain animation from Bambi, which came out in 1942, was scanned into the CAP system and digitally altered to fit in the segment. The ending was to feature the original ending with the soldier and ballerina melting in the fire, but the music was too upbeat to animate it and was changed. And an excerpt of the segment was shown at the 1998 SIG-GRAPH conference. And you know what? I'm actually glad that we got a happy ending for the ballerina and soldier. I mean, that whole segment would have been a nightmare if they actually included the whole melting scene, right? That would have been messed up right there. And it would ruin and in my opinion it would probably ruin that segment, and it will probably ruin that whole composition as a whole. But I'm really glad that it got a happy ending with just the ballerina and soldier reuniting at the end and then being a couple, right? I think that was and I believe that was a smart move right there, because the melting in the fire, that would have been a huge nightmare right there. Now the next number, there's nothing much to say about this segment. I wasn't really attached to this segment as much as the other ones, but I was okay with it. I thought it was just okay. I mean, I thought it was okay. Especially, but I do appreciate the fight between the Tin Soldier and the Jack in the Box. Like, I thought the fight between those two was pretty good. especially at the end where the Jack in the Box lands into the fireplace. Like, oh man, like that Jack in the Box is a real creep, and I'm glad that the Tin Soldier won the fight, the second fight, not the first fight, the second fight. So anyway, just to move forward, and the composition itself, I actually like the piano composition. I actually like the composition, and the piano solo is really good too. Like Shostakovich, I actually now this is a Shostakovich piece, and this is actually a real good piece right there. Now to move forward with the next number, which is the Carnival of the Animals, and this is actually by Camille Saint-Saëns, and this is actually introduced by James Earl Jones, who, as I mentioned, read off of this question, what would happen if you give a yo-yo to a flock of flamingos, right? And James Earl Jones was like, "Who wrote this?" Like, I don't know, but the whole musical composition speaks for itself when it was shown on screen, right? Now, I think in my opinion, I enjoyed this number, but some people said that this. Some people said I feel like some people see, but now I like this number, but I think this one kind of belongs to a. I want to say a different movie or some sort. I don't know, like for a Fantasia movie, I don't know, but I still think it works. I still think it's a good. I still think it's a fun musical number. Like the Carnival of the Animals finale was directed and animated by Goldberg. His wife Susan was its art director, and the idea originated from animator Joe Grant. One of the sto- one of the story one of the two story directors on Fantasia who loved the ostriches in Dance of the Hours, and I think that's what this segment was trying to do. It was trying to be like Dance of the Hours, right? If you know what I'm saying. I think that's the reason why they went with this. I think that's why they went with this, right? So during the development of Fantasia 2000, Grant suggested the idea of having one of the ostriches play with a yo-yo to the last movement of the Carnival of the Animals. The ostriches were later changed to flamingos as Disney wished to avoid reintroducing characters from the original film and thought flamingos would look more colorful on the screen. And I think I think that was, and you know what? I think that speaks for itself because come to think about it, you have Dance of the Hours with ostriches, elephants, hippopotamuses, and alligators, right? And and changing the ostriches, just to play with your yo-yo instead of dancing. I thought that I think that idea is a bit silly, right? Like this is supposed to be like a silly musical number, but at the same time, I'm actually kind of glad that coming to think of it, I think the flamingos were a good choice because why not? So Goldberg was partly inspired by co-director Mike Gabriel, who would play with a yo-yo as he took a break from working on Pocahontas, which came out in 1995, and Gabriel is given a credit for yo-yo tricks in the end credits. That's a nice credit right there. The segment was produced with CGI and 6,000 watercolor paintings on heavy bond paper. Susan chose a distinct color palette for the segment, which she compared it to the style of a Hawaiian shirt. The Goldbergs and their team visited the zoo in Los Angeles and San Diego to study the anatomy and movement of flamingos. And that's actually nice right there. Keep in mind, the Carnival of the Animals finale is the shortest segment from this movie, right? And being a film that is basically about 70 minutes long, that really says enough when one of your segments is the shortest of the bunch, right? So anyway, we move forward to the Sorcerer's Apprentice, and I kind of did that already when I was talking about the number, but just to give you the short version, the Sorcerer's Apprentice obviously introduced by Penn and Teller, to which the two of them are magicians, but of course you probably wonder, but it's kind of funny at the same time to see them both on screen But also at the same time, you're wondering why, how, what? We're also wondering what, right? Because come to think about it, Deems Taylor was the one who introduced the Sorcerer's Apprentice in the first Fantasia film. Although he didn't mention the name of the composition, he literally teased it, right? Giving people the idea of this, like he gave people the idea of the story, right, and not the title of the story, right? But of course, Penn and Teller said the title of the song, right? Because obviously they're basically excited because this is because Fantasia is the only composition from the original movie that made an appearance in the sequel, right? And of course, the idea of the Sorcerer's Apprentice was an idea that happened in the late 30s, and it was originally going to be a silly symphony, right? Like the Sorcerer's Apprentice was originally going to be a silly symphony with Walt Disney and Leopold Stokowski, but unfortunately later down the line, it would be a good idea to have that be a part of a segment with more classic compositions for Walt Disney's Fantasia, right? And of course, without the Sorcerer's Apprentice, Fantasia would not have been a thing, right? Like the Sorcerer's Apprentice is the reason why Fantasia existed. I love this number, the animation for this. It is actually nice that the Sorcerer's Apprentice was in this movie because it really gave off the nostalgic vibes and reminding the reminding the fans that hey, the Sorcerer's Apprentice is still around for Fantasia, right? The end of the Sorcerer's Apprentice segues into Pomp and Circumstance, where Mickey Mouse, voiced this time by Wayne Allwine, sees James Levine introduce the next segment, which is Pomp and Circumstance, which is the land of hope and glory. Now, of course, mostly known as Britain's most loved patriotic song, thanks to its choral counterpart, Land of Hope and Glory, the original march was created for royal and solemn events, but Eisner suggested his use as a standalone piece after he attended a graduation and thought its familiarity would be suitable for a Fantasia segment. His idea involved a selection of Disney princesses and heroes in a wedding procession carrying their future children, who would then be presented in a ceremony. The animator's preliminary designs depicted as Greco-Roman setting. One of the staff members described the artwork as an appalling abuse of the characters. Eisner agreed to drop the story but insisted that the music be used. And after numerous ideas were scrapped due to the difficulty in writing a clear plot, animator director Francis Glebus came up with the idea of came up with the Noah's Ark story that he titled Donald's Last Roundup, later retitled as Noah's Duck, and pitched it thinking it was Aladdin with comic possibilities. And you know what? I'm actually kind of glad that they actually used Donald Duck for this segment, because come to think of it, I don't know how I feel with the Disney princesses and heroes in a wedding procession. I mean, as cool of an idea as it sounds, I think it would not have worked out well. And coming to think of it, this is towards the end of the Disney Renaissance, to be quite honest. But I mean, I don't think it would have. I mean, as interesting of an idea as it sounds, I think it would not have worked. But I'm actually glad that they dropped the idea and decided, like, you know what, let's go with Donald Duck for this one. You know, and using the story of Noah's Ark, I think that was a better move right there, because it hits better in my opinion. Like, and having the music number of Pomp and Circumstance doing the march, right, which is the actual march for the graduation, which is the dun 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 ba, ba. I thought that worked very well with the animals walking into the ark, right? I thought that was amazing right there, especially the aftermath, right, where it got really epic. But it's also nice that Donald is also reunited with Daisy at the end, because coming to think of it, Daisy and Donald were separated during the whole flood sequence, and the two of them were sad. Donald thinks he'll never see Daisy again. The same can be said with Daisy as well. All right, but I'm glad I'm glad the two were able to get a happy ending. All right, last musical number. So the last musical number is introduced by Angela Lansbury, and that is the Firebird from Igor Stravinsky, to which Igor Stravinsky did the Rite of Spring in the original Fantasia. And funny, and here's something that is interesting: the Firebird was inspired by the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, and that was used to close out the movie. So Disney wanted a piece that was emotionally equivalent to the Nine Ball Mountain and Ave Maria segments that closed Fantasia, which is why Disney chose the Firebird as the piece to use after half a dozen others were scrapped, including Symphony No. 9 by Beethoven and the Hallelujah Chorus from Messiah by George Frederick Handel. And of course, Mount St. Helens is the inspiration for this segment because of the eruption that happened in 1980. French twins Paul and Gaëtan Brizzy, French twins Paul and Gaëtan Brizzy from Disney's Paris studio were hired to direct the segment. The sprite is a dryad-like creature from Greek mythology. Her form changes 6 times from a water sprite who plants flower from a water sprite to a flower sprite to a neutral sprite, and of course to an ash sprite, to becoming a rain wave like sprite and grass sprite. Like, those are like 6 different forms for this sprite, right? Those transformations happen when she's going through different parts of the forest. Like, you know, she starts off underwater as a water sprite who plants flowers as a flower sprite, and then she becomes a neutral sprite where her growth trails stops, and an ash sprite when the forest has been destroyed by fire, which is the actual Firebird coming out of the volcano, destroying everything in sight. Of course, the eruption itself, which is arguably one of the darkest and scariest moments from Walt Disney's Fantasia 2000, in my opinion. And then, of course, you get the ash sprite during the aftermath, where the entire forest is destroyed, right? And the elk that is being featured in this segment sees it all, right? So, of course, the segment ends with the sprite riding on the elk and becomes a rain wave sprite, followed by the grass sprite. And the segment originally ended with the sprite in the form of a flowing river that rises up into the sky and transforms into a sun sprite. But this was abandoned. But seeing the sprite become a grass sprite, I think that was a good move, because without it, you would not have an amazing finale from the Firebird. Like, you got this orchestra ending it with something that is epic, right? And I thought that was amazing. And also, the elk's antlers were produced by CGI and placed on top of his body that was drawn traditionally. The segment was produced using Houdini animation software. That's pretty much it right there. That is basically all the segments from Walt Disney's Fantasia 2000. That's pretty much it right there. Also to mention, going back to the celebrities one more time, Don Hall, who directed the live action scenes, he was basically fine. He had some difficulty. He had a difficult time finding someone to host the film, so the studio decided to use a group of artists and musicians from various fields of entertainment. Which, of course, this is of course referring to the celebrities, right? That were shown in the movie to open up the segments, right? And each scene for the celebrities was filmed in front of a green screen to allow the shots of the orchestra or the set to be placed behind them. And the shots of James Levine and the artists and the orchestra were filmed on October 31st of 1998. The piano that Grierson plays in the scene with Jones is the same one on which he played Rhapsody in Blue for the soundtrack. And like I said, I feel like they should have stuck out with at least one celebrity, but after seeing the different celebrities, I think 4 or 5 celebrities is a good number in my opinion. But other than that, that's pretty much it. So there you have it, folks. That's my covering of Walt Disney's Fantasia 2000. Now, my final thoughts. I still enjoy this movie for what it is, and if I were to rank this movie, I give it an 8 out of 10. I really enjoy this movie for what it is. It's not as great as the original movie, but I still enjoy it for what it is. So anyway, that's about it for this episode. And to anyone who is listening, what did you guys think of Walt Disney's Fantasia 2000? Did you like this movie? Did you not like this movie? Did you think this movie holds up 25, 26 years later? I would love to hear your thoughts. But anyway, that is a wrap on this episode. Thank you all for tuning into Codo Cinema. I'm your host, Mark Codo, aka Codoman. Remember to watch movies and stay positive.